For the last weeks, I've had early access to the preview build of Dawn of War 4, and after several hours of hands-on gameplay, I'm going to break down the good, the bad, and exactly what you can expect. All the factions at launch, the gameplay changes, and why this could be the return that Dawn of War fans have been waiting for. Because for years, the community has been asking for a true return to large-scale, real-time strategy warfare. Like the base building, the tech trees, massive armies, and the gritty chaos of the 41st millennium that we all experienced in the tabletop and the original Dawn of War game. Dawn of War 4 is the spiritual successor to the original game, Dawn of War 1. It's been modernized with new mechanics and a fresh coat of cinematic detail, but at its core, it is what we loved about Dawn of War 1, just recreated in Dawn of War 4. And they've sent me some footage for the background here, but unfortunately I can't show you my own gameplay footage just yet, so make sure you subscribe for more in the future. But for now, let's talk about what makes Dawn of War 4 different. Because this isn't the squad tactics from Dawn of War 2 or the MOBA-like experiments of Dawn of War 3. We are back to what fans actually loved about this series. Here's a quick overview. Dawn of War 4 is going to have 4 factions at launch: Space Marines, Orks, Adeptus Mechanicus, and Necrons, each with their own complete campaign. And I'll tell you more about how that's going to work in a moment. Now, the Imperial Guard do show up as an AI faction, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them as playable in the future, but for now they're just AI allies. They have a fully fledged base building system, just like the first game, but every faction now plays completely differently, with unique economics, techs, and battlefield strategies. So massively built on compared to the original game. We still have requisition and power resources which you need to capture from different points on the map to build generators and then defend them from the enemy. And that's going to allow you to scale up your army into elite units, tanks, and even super heavies like Imperial Knights. Now there's over 110 different build options for structures and upgrades for your overall army and specific units, which also then unlock different unit skills, like using jump packs. And if you've been following the Warhammer 40k tabletop, they have actually updated all the naming, like Space Marine Intercessors or Assault Intercessors as opposed to Assault Marines, and so on. Each faction also now has hero units with powerful upgradable abilities to swing key fights. And if you're a fan of the series, you will recognize some of these heroes. The developers have also overhauled the melee combat completely. So instead of 2 squads just flailing at each other with the same animation, basically just trading numbers, they now physically clash. So the weapons physically hit each other. Shields slam, foes react, and mounted units either knock down the enemies or pick them up and push them back. So it's much more bloody and impactful. The developers were telling me that they built a whole system with over 10,000 variations of melee kill moves. So no 2 fights are going to be the same, and those 2 units are going to be physically interacting. So now when you zoom in onto those battles, you actually get some cool eye candy where you can enjoy the carnage. But I want to go further into detail when it comes to the faction playstyles. So you've obviously got Space Marines, the poster boys. They have small squads of elite troops numbering between 3 and 10. Just like in the tabletop. They've got really strong upgrades that are super impactful. So you can turn an Assault Intercessor squad into infantry killers by equipping them with power swords, or you can turn them into heavy armor destroyers by equipping them with thunder hammers. And most of the Space Marine units in the game have this option depending on the enemy you're dealing with. This obviously means that the Space Marines' numbers are quite limited, and because they're an elite force, you're going to want to deploy turrets around your recess points to protect them so you don't have to always have troops standing nearby. And then you'll have your infiltrator strike teams capturing the other points on the map and trying to gain domination. They also have optional drop pod deployments for instant reinforcements on the front line as well. The Orks, on the other hand, have very cheap buildings that can actually be built anywhere on the map to rapidly supply more boys onto the front line and keep up the pressure on enemies, so they don't have to walk all the way from your base each time you spawn them. All their buildings are also self-defending, so they will have mounted turrets and can protect themselves from troops attacking. They still have the Warg meter, which lets you unleash mobs of Orks to overwhelm enemies by buffing your troops with damage and letting them succumb to the green tide. Obviously, the Ork squads themselves are massive in size compared to the Space Marines. You can get everything from grots to mega nobs, and most of the infantry units also have the ability to build structures too. Adeptus Mechanicus, on the other hand, are a tech-focused faction that can track enemy movements through the fog of war. And as you build your structures, they're going to be creating a network of information that also boosts the efficiency of your resource nodes, which means you gain an advantage by getting more resources and power compared to the enemy as the battle goes on. All the Mechanicus infantry from the 40k tabletop is represented from what I saw in the preview. Necrons, on the other hand, might be slow, but they're pretty much unstoppable. Their base building strategy is very slow. You're basically aiming to spread a power matrix across the map, connecting all the Necron buildings and slowly gaining domination as you expand it. While the Necron units themselves actually self-heal, and monoliths can teleport troops straight into the front line for sudden strikes at their weakest point. Now, in the demo I played, the Imperial Guard were used as cannon fodder by the AI-controlled faction. They did have scout sentinels and large big groups of men, but that's all I actually saw. I didn't get to play them myself because they're not a playable faction and they won't be at launch either. Now, as I mentioned earlier, each one of those factions has their own campaign. Now, you can play those campaigns in any order, but there is kind of like a specific order to play them in if you want the overarching story. The story itself is set 200 years after the Dark Crusade. So the Blood Ravens have scattered and planet Cronus is at war. The story was actually written though by the Black Library author John French, so expect this to be an epic tale indeed. I was actually surprised to learn that the campaign choices do matter as well. So from what the developers explained, there seems to be a big decision moment in each campaign. Like with the Orks, for example, you can side with two different sub-factions, either the Bad Moons or the Beast Snaggers. And I did see that the Beast Snaggers had their mounted units and they like knock you down. They're very fast moving and annoying to deal with. Whereas I didn't see any gameplay from the Bad Moons specifically. So I assume that will affect what units you get access to, but it also affects the story too. And the Space Marines get an option to save one thing or another, and that choice also has consequences on how things play out for you in that campaign. You can also expect a mix of grim cinematic moments and fun. There's also animated in-game cutscenes like we saw in the original Dawn of War, but each battle scenario actually plays more like an RTS game, with various objectives and bonus objectives to secure. And then you have those story moments and cinematics after each mission. Now, as for the game modes, Dawn of War 4 is going to feature the best game modes from the history of the series. You've got Last Stand, which was my absolute favorite to play in co-op with other friends. So that's coming back, and it's going to be against endless waves of enemies. You'll be able to upgrade your heroes, give them new equipment as you jump in, and each faction is going to have different heroes to choose from and upgrade and level up, just like the original version. But again, I didn't get to play that in this version of Dawn of War 4, but I expect it to be like the original, but just improved on. Then you have the multiplayer skirmish modes, which supports co-op against AI or player versus player. And I could see from the work in progress options on the menu here, which should be taken with a pinch of salt, but it's in the menu, so it's probably in the game, but you could go up to 4 players from what I could see here. And you can pick and swap the different spawn points too. I also spotted that there is a rating system for the different maps and scenarios. So I'm assuming that we're going to see community-made maps that can be shared and rated, and maybe in the future, some form of mod support as well. Now, there's lots of customizability for different levels. Like, you can start with lots of resources and the whole tech tree and all of the units completely unlocked. So you can just jump into the game, you know, build massive titans and war machines, and then just go straight into battle without sort of that slow progression at the start of the game where you start off with the basic scout units and sort of capture objectives. You can also turn off Fog of War, you can change the map biomes, and you can choose how much damage you deal or take, so you can really customize the difficulty from the options I've seen so far. I wasn't actually able to mess around with them or play with any of those. I could only play on the normal mode, which in my opinion was way too easy. There's also general balance things, so if you're building structures further away from your HQ, they will take longer to build. I also noticed that they had an army painter option, so you can customize your forces with different paint schemes. I actually couldn't click on it, but I know it's there. And obviously, I personally love painting miniatures. I've got a miniature painting tabletop channel, so if you like Warhammer 40k or Lord of the Rings, make sure you check that out because I'm currently building a Lord of the Rings army and painting it up on the channel. It's called ESO Tabletop, but I'll link it below. As for the actual gameplay that we were allowed to play, it was a Gamescom press preview demo. So we just got access to this one scenario where it was Space Marines allied with Imperial Guards versus a Ork faction. And the Necrons also appeared at 1.2. But as for the gameplay, it plays exactly like Dawn of War 1 in many ways. Like the HUD and everything's very similar. It just all has been visually updated and streamlined. So you start out building your chapter keep, or your HQ as it was called back then. You've also got the chapel barracks, which offers all your troop options and upgrades like infiltrator squads, intercessor and assault intercessors who have access to upgrade to jump packs and then power swords or thunder hammers and all these different weapon options depending on if you want anti-armor or anti-infantry. The balancing in this game is kind of like most RTSs where it's a bit like rock, paper, scissors. So if you want to deal with enemy armor, you get this upgrade. If you want to deal with infantry, you get that upgrade. Then there's some weapons like the Stalker bolt rifles that kind of do a bit of both, but aren't super effective at doing either. Then you also have the Sanctum building, which lets you produce elite infantry options like ranged Terminators, Blade Guard, Eradicators, and the Armory lets you build tanks like the Gladius, the Redemptor, the Dreadnought, Bikers, the Repulsor, and the Scout Dreadnought with the Heavy Flamer. And then you're going to go out and start capturing requisition points and building resource generators on them, which you'll then use to upgrade your units. And in Dawn of War 4, it's going to pay to keep your units alive because they all level up with experience and become more effective in battle. Obviously, as well, it's more expensive to buy a new Space Marine squad than it is to keep that one alive and reinforce it during the battle, which still costs power and resources to do, but it's less expensive. But this specific scenario had access to the Space Marine hero Silas, who some of you will remember. He's a scout sniper with the option to swap his weapon and upgrade it with various other utility options like plasma-based stuff. And he also had a lot of utility, like he could order a specific target and then everyone around him would do additional damage to that target. He could also throw out mines and create choke points or even suppress units that were specifically in cover. And he had tons of upgrade options available for different utility items, which to be honest, I could make an entire video about because it was that complex. Each army overall also had access to unique stratagems. So the Space Marines could grant experience to one squad, but then they could also call in a Thunderhawk bombing run, which blew up everything in a long line of wherever you wanted to place it. Or they could do an orbital bombardment, which would decimate everything in the area, including buildings as well. Each unit itself also had a bunch of unique skills, and some of those skills were unlocked depending what weapons you gave to them. Crack grenades, Icarus missile pods, or plasma overcharge, which does the AoE damage. Basically everything from the tabletop for all of those different units is represented, and it was so satisfying to see it all come to life. Obviously though, like I said, I was only able to play on the normal difficulty, and that was very, very easy. I'm not sure if that's because it was a Gamescom demo press build, and you've probably heard the memes about gaming journalists not being able to play games, so I think maybe they toned it back a bit. But I found that the AI would send like waves of troops sort of just down the middle every now and again, And mostly it felt like in this scenario, they were waiting for me to sort of progress through the map a little bit. And then they would start counterattacking with some more built up, stronger foes and forces. There were a few unique mechanics where they were digging up some Gorkanauts. And if you didn't destroy them in time, they would repair them and then they would send them at you. And if you hadn't, prepared, that would be a really difficult battle. But at that time, I had the Gladius tank and I was unstoppable. That thing was built like a truck. Honestly though, let me know in the comments if you want a full breakdown of every Space Marine unit, their upgrades and what they were like to play. They kept things very true to the tabletop. So if you're jumping into Dawn of War 4, you'll know exactly what's going on just intuitively from having played the tabletop and knowing what the codex upgrades for each unit is. Overall though, if you loved the original Dawn of War, the scale, the base building, and the distinct faction strategies, this is looking like the sequel you've been waiting for with everything else thrown on top, but it's true to the original. They understood what made that game great and they built on it and made it even better. That is the takeaway I've received so far from the preview I saw and just playing this scenario and seeing it for myself. And with the mix of the old school RTS design and the modernized presentation, Dawn of War 4 might just win back the trust of a community that's been waiting nearly 2 decades for a battle of this scale in a universe of Warhammer 40k that we all love. Now, I just need to bring back the Conquest mode for DLC in Dawn of War 1, and damn, this game is getting a 10 out of 10. I think that might be a future DLC thing, but that was just so infinitely fun. I love that game mode, and I'd love to see it come back. So hit subscribe for future updates, and I will see you in the full version of the game.